You know that feeling, right? You're
Yep.
trying to wrap your head around a topic, maybe in education, educational psychology,
Mm.
and you're just faced with this huge pile of research articles, maybe for a presentation or just, staying current.
Yeah, the information overload is real.
Totally. And actually sifting through all those titles, the abstracts, to find what's actually relevant, it takes forever.
It really does.
And get this, I saw a figure, I think it was from Health Sciences, saying a single systematic review could take up to like 72 weeks of skilled work.
72 weeks. Yeah, that sounds about right for some complex reviews. It just highlights how incredibly time-consuming the traditional approach is.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Which, makes you wonder, there's got to be a smarter way, right? Especially now with just so much research coming out all the time.
Exactly, particularly in fields like education where things can be, well, a bit less clear-cut than, say, identifying a specific drug trial.
Right. So that's what we're digging into today. We're looking at how machine learning is kind of stepping into this space.
Uh-huh. Offering a potential way to make that whole review process, well, faster and maybe even better.
And there's this specific study we're looking at, Screening Smarter, Not Harder. Great title, by the way.
It is catchy. It's a comparative analysis looking at machine learning algorithms and these heuristic stopping criteria specifically for systematic reviews in educational research.
Okay, so focusing right on our field. That's key.
Yeah, because as I said, education and EdPsych have their own unique challenges, and you need to know if these tools actually work well here.
Makes sense. So our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear then. Can machine learning actually lighten the load for reviewing research in our field?
And crucially, can it do that accurately, without missing the really important stuff?
Yeah, that's the big fear, isn't it? Missing something vital. And also this practical question, when can you actually stop screening? Like, when is enough enough?
Exactly. That's a
Yeah.
huge efficiency question for anyone doing this kind of work.
Okay, so before we get into the machine learning part, let's just quickly touch on why that manual screening is such a pain point. What's the bottleneck?
Well, think about it. The study mentions reviewers spend maybe 30 seconds per title and abstract initially.
30 seconds. Sounds quick.
But multiply that by hundreds, sometimes thousands, of hits from your initial database search.
Oof. Yeah, that adds up incredibly fast. It's just a massive time sink right at the start.
Precisely. It holds up the whole process of actually synthesizing the evidence. And that's why this idea of automating it using machine learning is so attractive.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about these learning algorithms. How do they actually, do the screening? What's the basic idea?
So the core principle is training an algorithm. You feed it example studies that a human expert has already marked as relevant or irrelevant for the research question.
Okay.
The algorithm then learns to spot patterns. It looks for certain words, phrases, maybe even how they're used together that tend to show up in the relevant studies.
So it's like teaching it what relevant looks like based on examples.
Exactly. And once it's learned those patterns, it can then look at new unseen abstracts and predict whether they're likely to be relevant or not.
Almost like a super fast research assistant you've trained up.
That's a good analogy. And often it uses something called active learning.
Active learning.
Yeah, so it's not just a one-off training. There's a feedback loop. The researcher labels a few. The algorithm learns, predicts some more it thinks are relevant.
Yeah.
The researcher checks those predictions, gives feedback. Yes, this was relevant. No, this wasn't. And the algorithm uses that new information to get even better. It's iterative.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It keeps refining its understanding. So how does it actually read the text? How does it go from words in an abstract to something a machine can process?
Right, that's the feature extraction stage. You need to convert the text into essentially numbers the algorithm can crunch.
Okay.
Older methods, you might have heard of bag of words or TF-IDF.
Vaguely familiar, yeah. They count words, right?
Pretty much. They focus on how often specific terms appear. So if keywords pop up a lot, it might flag it.
But that sounds a bit basic. Doesn't really get the meaning, does it?
Exactly. That's the limitation. They miss the context, the semantics. That's why newer techniques are more powerful. The study mentions word embeddings, like doc-to-vec.
Word embeddings.
Yeah, they represent words as vectors, like points in a conceptual space. Words with similar meanings end up closer together. It captures some relationship.
Okay, getting more sophisticated.
But the really exciting one, highlighted in the study, is BERT, bidirectional encoder representations from transformers.
BERT. Okay, that sounds complex. What's special about BERT?
Its superpower is understanding context. It doesn't just look at a word in isolation, it looks at the words around it in both directions to figure out the meaning in that specific sentence.
Ah, okay. Like how bank means something different by a river versus in finance.
Precisely. BERT gets that kind of contextual meaning, which is crucial for academic texts where terms can be subtle or used in specific ways.
Got it. So we've turned text into meaningful numbers using something like BERT. What's next?
Next comes model training. You take those features, those numerical representations, and you train a classifier model.
A classifier.
Yeah.
Like something that sorts things.
Exactly. It learns from the examples you initially labeled, and this abstract's features mean it's relevant, that one's features mean it's irrelevant. It builds a predictive model based on that.
And there are different types of these models.
Yeah, the study looked at several common ones. Logistic regression, support vector machines, SVMs, naive Bayes, random forests. Think of them as different algorithms with different ways of drawing the line between relevant and irrelevant. Random forests, for instance, build lots of decision trees and combine their outputs.
Okay, so different strategies for making the prediction.
Right. And then the final piece we need to understand before looking at the results is the stopping criteria.
Ah, yes, the when can I stop question. Because screening everything, even with help, might still be too much.
Exactly. You want the efficiency gains. So how do you decide? There are statistical approaches, but the study focused on practical heuristic methods. Rules of thumb, basically.
Like what kind of rules?
Things like time-based rules. Stop after screening, say, 60% or 70% of the abstracts.
All right.
Or data-driven rules. Stop after you've found a certain number of irrelevant abstracts in a row. The idea being if you hit a long streak of irrelevance, maybe you found most of the good stuff already.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense.
And then there are mixed strategies, combining both like screen at least 20%, then stop if you hit 10 irrelevant ones in a row.
Right. And the big question was, how well do these rules actually work in education research?
Precisely. How reliable are they? Can you trust them? That's what they tested.
All right, context set. Let's get into the Screening Smarter study itself. How did they actually test all this?
They did something pretty smart. A retrospective screening simulation.
Retrospective. So looking back.
Exactly. They took 27 systematic reviews that had already been completed in education and EdPsych. Real reviews where humans had already manually screened everything.
Okay, so they had the ground truth of what was relevant.
Right. Then they used this open source tool called AS Review, which implements many of these algorithms, and basically reran the screening process automatically using the different algorithms and stopping rules.
Ah, so they could compare the machine's performance, what it found, what it missed, how quickly against what the original human reviewers did.
Spot on. They looked at things like sensitivity, did it find the relevant studies? Specificity, did it correctly ignore the irrelevant ones? And crucially, the estimated time savings.
Okay, clever setup. So what did they find? Let's start with the first research question. How well did the different learning algorithms perform?
The big headline finding was the overall workload reduction. It was pretty dramatic.
Yeah, how much?
On average, using these machine learning algorithms reduced the number of irrelevant records researchers had to screen by 58%.
58%. Wow, that's huge. That's more than half the irrelevant stuff just gone from your workload.
Exactly, and they calculated the average estimated time saved was around 1.66 days.
A day and a half, almost 2 days saved just on that initial screening. That's significant time researchers could use for, well, deeper analysis or writing.
Absolutely. Think about what else you could do with that time. More thorough analysis, maybe tackling another part of the project.
Definitely valuable.
Yeah.
Did one algorithm stand out as the best?
Yes. Consistently, the random forests with sentence BERT, RF plus SBERT combination, performed best overall.
RF plus SBERT. So the random forest classifier combined with that context-aware feature extraction.
Correct. Which really underlines that understanding the meaning and context of the text, which BERT is good at, seems particularly important for navigating the language used in education research.
That makes sense, given the nuances we talked about. Did they notice anything else about algorithm performance?
Yeah, a couple of interesting correlations with the data itself. They found that with larger databases, the algorithms tended to have higher specificity. They were better at filtering out the irrelevant stuff.
Okay, so bigger haystack, better at finding the straw, maybe.
Sort of, yeah. But interestingly, if the original data set already had a high proportion of relevant studies, then the specificity tended to be a bit lower.
Meaning it struggled more to separate the irrelevant from the relevant when there was already a lot of relevant stuff.
Kind of like it gets a bit harder to perfectly distinguish when the signal of relevant studies is already very strong, still very effective, but unnuanced, they observed.
Interesting. Okay, let's move to the second big question. Those heuristic stopping criteria. When to stop screening? What about the time-based rules?
So for time-based strategies, they found that on average, screening about 70% of the abstracts was enough to find 95% of the relevant studies.
Okay, so screening 70% gets you 95% recall.
Okay.
That implies some savings by not doing the last 30%.
Right. And for some of the better algorithms, like the SBERT ones we mentioned, LR plus SBERT, RF plus SBERT, they could hit that 95% recall mark by screening only 60% of the abstracts.
Even better,
Hmm.
50% screened, potentially saving 40% of the effort while finding almost all relevant papers.
Potentially, yes. But, and this is important, they found a strong link here too. The percentage you needed to screen to hit 95% recall was higher if the initial dataset had more relevant studies in it.
Ah, so if it's dense with relevant stuff, you might need to screen more like 70% or even 80% to be confident you've got most of them.
That seems to be the case, yeah. It's not one fixed percentage for every situation.
Okay. What about the data-driven approach? Stopping after a certain number of irrelevant abstracts in a row.
That also showed promise. On average, finding about 7% of consecutive irrelevant abstracts could also lead to achieving that 95% recall target.
7%. So if your dataset has 1,000 abstracts, you stop after finding 70 irrelevant ones in a sequence.
Roughly, yeah, that's the idea. But the effectiveness here varied more. It depended quite a bit on the specific algorithm and the dataset. Some needed a longer streak of irrelevant finds.
So less consistent than the percentage-based approach, maybe.
It seemed a bit less predictable, and they noted it might be less reliable for smaller databases. If you only have a few hundred abstracts total, waiting for a long consecutive run of irrelevant ones might not be practical or trustworthy.
Good point. Okay, and finally, the mixed strategies, combining a percentage screened and a consecutive irrelevant threshold.
Yeah, these looked quite effective too. One combination they highlighted, screening an initial 20% and then stopping after finding 5% consecutive irrelevant ones, group E, achieved a good average specificity. It was good at filtering out jump while still aiming for high recall.
So kind of getting the best of both worlds. An initial guaranteed look, then a data-driven stop.
Potentially, yeah. And again, the RF plus SBERT model tended to perform well across these mixed strategies too. It seems quite robust.
This really sounds like that RF plus SBERT is the star player here.
It certainly came out looking very strong in this particular study for this type of data.
But the overall message on stopping rules seems to be, it depends.
Absolutely. That's the crucial caveat the authors stress. The best stopping rule, or even how well any rule works, depends heavily on things like how big is your initial database, what percentage of studies in it are actually relevant, how complex is your research topic, and which learning algorithm are you using.
So no magic bullet number, you have to be thoughtful about it.
You really do. It requires understanding the context of your specific review.
Now let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the unique challenges in education and educational psychology research. How did that play out, the language issue?
Yeah, the construct clarity issue. Unlike, say, medicine, where diabetes type 2 is a pretty standard term, in education we often have multiple terms for similar ideas. Think about student engagement versus student motivation versus time on task. They overlap, but aren't identical.
Right, or different names for similar teaching approaches. Lots of jargon, too.
Exactly. And that fuzziness can potentially confuse algorithms that rely purely on keywords matching. If different relevant studies use different terms, a simple keyword approach might miss them.
But you said the BERT-based algorithms did well.
Right. And that suggests their ability to understand semantic meaning, the underlying concepts, not just the surface words, helps them overcome this challenge. They're better at recognizing that studies talking about similar ideas are relevant, even if they use slightly different terminology.
That's actually really promising for our field, then. These more advanced tools might be better suited for education's linguistic works.
It certainly looks that way based on this research.
So, despite the challenges, what are the really practical take-home benefits here for researchers in education?
Well, number one is clearly the time savings. That 58% average reduction in screening irrelevant records is huge.
Frees up so much time.
Number two, potentially reducing human error. We know manual screening isn't perfect. Reviewers can get tired or miss things. Studies suggest humans might miss up to 13% of relevant papers. Consistent algorithms could potentially lower that miss rate, though they aren't perfect either, of course.
More consistency, maybe higher accuracy overall if used well.
possibly. And third, it could enable broader search strategies. If you know you have a tool to help efficiently sift through results, you might feel more comfortable casting a wider net with your initial search terms.
Oh, interesting. So you worry less about getting too many results because the machine can help handle the volume. That could lead to more comprehensive reviews, less publication bias, maybe.
That's the hope, yes. Finding relevant studies that might have been missed with narrower, more targeted searches.
But it's not just push button, get results, right? There's a need for caution.
Absolutely. The authors really emphasize the need to avoid treating these tools as black boxes. Researchers need to understand, at least conceptually, how the algorithm works, why they chose a particular stopping rule.
And report those choices transparently in their reviews.
Exactly. Transparency and reproducibility are key. You need to document what tool you used, which algorithm, what settings, what stopping rule, so others can understand and evaluate your methodology.
Okay, so summing it all up, what's the main point we should walk away with from this deep dive?
I think the key takeaway is that these machine learning tools, like ACE Review, which uses algorithms like RF plus SBERT, genuinely hold significant promise for making that initial, often painful screening phase of research reviews in education and EdPsych much, much more efficient.
Big time savings, potentially less error.
Right. But it's not foolproof. It's not magic. Understanding the strengths and weaknesses of different algorithms, especially how they handle language,
Like BERT understanding context.
and being really thoughtful about when to stop screening based on the specifics of your project, that's absolutely critical. It's a powerful tool, but it requires informed use.
Informed use, not blind faith. Makes sense. Okay, here's something to chew on then as we wrap up. With this tidal wave of research constantly growing, how might using these AI tools more widely actually reshape how we synthesize knowledge in education? Could it, speed up getting research findings into actual practice, into policy? And maybe, as these tools get even more complex, what new ethical questions pop up about how algorithms filter the very research that shapes our field?
Those are definitely big, important questions to ponder as this technology becomes more common. The potential impact is huge, both positive and, well, things we need to consider carefully.
Absolutely. Well, for anyone listening who is doing systematic reviews or just dealing with mountains of literature, definitely check out the study we talked about, Screening Smarter, Not Harder in Educational Psychology Review. And maybe even look into tools like AS Review. It's a fascinating space to watch.